if you listen to the American media, which are basically propagandists for the Democrat Party and the Biden regime, you would think that Donald Trump is Hitler. No, worse than Hitler, that he wants to execute and imprison everybody. And if he's not Hitler, he's Stalin. If he's not Stalin, well, he's Mussolini. He's all these horrid things, and we know this to be the case because Joe Scarborough said so. And whatever Joe Scarborough says, of course, is very, very crucial. And that's regurgitated by Media Matters and Mediaite and the usual Democrat Party propaganda network. But I want to set the record straight thanks to this rabbi. He wrote, I don't know why Donald Trump loves Jews. Maybe because more than 90% of Orthodox Jews voted for him against both Hillary and Joe Biden. Maybe because his daughter is an Orthodox Jew. Maybe because Jared Kushner, his son-in-law, whom he loves and trusts, is an Orthodox Jew. Maybe because Trump's grandchildren are Orthodox Jews who observe the Shabbat according to its law, eat strictly kosher, attend yeshiva, Jewish parochial school. Or my personal theory, he says, maybe because his father, Fred, who was one of the great Philo-Semites, that is, Jew supporters, of the prior generation, who even donated property to a Jewish congregation for them to have a synagogue, taught young Donald that part of the Trump family legacy is to love Jews. Now, isn't this interesting? So the American media, which is so detestable and unconscionable, so totally immoral, tries to turn Donald Trump into an anti-Semite Jew hater, when in fact, he has spent his entire life supporting Jews and Jewish causes, as had his father. But I want to get into something more specific, because I want to juxtapose this with Biden and the Biden regime and the Democrats. When others refused to hire Jews, Trump did. Number one, he opened the restricted Mar-a-Lago private club to blacks and Jews when he bought it. Number two, he surrounded himself with honorable Jewish legal scholars and attorneys like David Friedman and Jason Greenblatt, and even a bum named Michael Cohen, whose kid's bar mitzvah he attended. In Israel, Trump will be elected prime minister by a landslide, after nearly half a century of broken promises by other American presidents. 3, Trump formally declared and America recognized United Jerusalem as Israel's capital. 4, he moved America's Israel embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. 5, he recognized Israeli sovereignty over the Golan Heights. 6, he recognized the permanent legality of all Jewish communities and cities in Judea and Samaria, as in all legal situations that Israel's own courts regard them as legal. 7, he cut off hundreds of millions of dollars funding for Abu Mazen, that is, Mahmoud Abbas, the head of the Palestinian Liberation Organization that was founded by Arafat. Why? Because they were having pay for slay, that is, paying Palestinians to murder Jews, terrorism. This is what Biden and Blinken referred to as the moderate Palestinians, the PLO Fatah party. He closed down the PLO office in Washington, did Trump. Number 9, he closed down America's long-standing Palestine consulate in Jerusalem. 10, pulled the United States out of the anti-Semitic UN Human Rights Council. 11, cut off $300 million in funding that Americans had been sending to the Jew-hating UNRWA, a Jew-hating UN agency that runs schools in places like Gaza, where Arab Muslim children are taught to hate Jews and to murder Jews. Number 12, appointed a UN ambassador, Nikki Haley, who warned anti-Israel countries that were taking down names. 13, almost unilaterally brought about the Abraham Accords that induced several leading Arab Muslim countries for the first time to enter into the true peace agreements with Israel without Israel ceding an inch of Jewish territory in Judea and Samaria to the Palestinians. 15, his education secretary, Betsy DeVos, endorsed yeshiva education during visits to 2 yeshivas in a New York City trip while skipping visiting the city's public schools. 16, Trump issued an executive order on combating anti-Semitism to enhance enforcement of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act to protect Jewish college students from the overt Jew hatred now rampant on so many American campuses. You know, other presidents could have done that. So he takes the Civil Rights Act, that's this Title VI part, and he signs an executive order, and these suits that are being brought against these universities now are being brought under this part of the act as a result of Donald Trump's executive order. 17, he named Kenneth Marcus as Assistant Secretary of Civil Rights at the Department of Education to investigate anti-Semitic episodes at campuses like Rutgers University. Oh, the good old days when there was one campus. Now there's so many you can't even count them. Trump deported the last Nazi war criminal known to be hiding in America. He signed into law a bill making it easier for Holocaust victims to reclaim stolen property. He ended the disastrous Iran deal and implemented crushing sanctions against Iran. He signed the Taylor Force Act. No more American money goes to the PLO, the moderate Arabs, because they keep killing and using our money to kill Jews and Americans. Number 22, knocked off Qasem Soleimani, the head of the IRG for Iran. 23, rubbed out Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the head of ISIS. He shattered State Department policy by authorizing Americans born in Jerusalem to list Israel on their American passports as their country of birth. That was controversial before, if you can believe that. He imposed sanctions on the International Criminal Court for unfairly and illegally investigating Israel. And he said in his 2019 State of the Union address, quote, "We must never ignore the
vile poison of anti-Semitism or those who spread its venomous creed. With one voice, we must confront this hatred anywhere and everywhere it occurs."
And this is the man they call Hitler, because he used the word vermin. Because the Democrat Party and the media in this country are corrupt as hell. The Abraham Accords, from StandWithUs.com, a series of treaties normalizing diplomatic relations between Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, Morocco, facilitated by Trump and his people. Israel already had relations with Egypt and Jordan, and they were on the precipice of having diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia. This was groundbreaking. This was unimaginable, ladies and gentlemen. And even Dennis Ross, a former Middle East peace envoy for the U.S., wrote that the UAE's move, quote, "should also signal to Palestinians that others are not going to wait for them to make peace with Israel." He had it figured out, Trump did. And peace broke out throughout the Middle East. He left the Middle East in peace for the next administration. The relations with Israel. And it was Iran. It was Iran that was in trouble. Why? Because Donald Trump had had enough with Iran. Not only did he take out Soleimani, which made it clear to all the leaders of that Islamo-Nazi Iranian regime that he could take any of them out. Any of them out. So he stopped them from doing a number of things. For instance, as a result of his sanctions on oil, on trade, on finance, on everything he could put his stamp on, according to the BBC, this is just 3 or so years ago. Iran's economy has fallen into a deep recession. Iran's oil exports have plummeted. Their currency halved in value. Halved in value. In other words, their economy was collapsing. The living costs rose dramatically for the average Iranian. And the people were rising up. The protests, which continue to this day, but the Iranians have butchered and brutalized those people, most of whom are women and teenage girls who stood up against the dress policies and so forth. The protests represent the culmination of a dramatic and widespread shift in Iranian attitudes of the people and an increased appetite for risk in voicing opposition to the regime. They talk about more than 4,000 street protests. 21,000 protesters have been arrested. More than 550 people have been murdered. And the support for the protests and against the regime hit every age, every demographic in Iran, and so forth. Now, why am I bringing all this up? Because Biden and Blinken and Sullivan and all the rest of these reprobates are funding the Iranian regime, either directly, indirectly, without enforcing all of the provisions that Donald Trump put in place to choke out that regime economically, like Reagan choked out the Soviet Union, and collapse it and expand peace in the Middle East. The Biden administration took the opposite position, rearming Iran, taking off all of the Trump waivers or refusing to enforce them, all of them. Diplomatic ties through back channels and directly. The appointment of individuals who are special pleaders for Iran, which makes it, as I said before, the Al-His case look like a joke. Selling out America on the nuclear deal, selling out America across the board. And these waivers, they were given even before negotiations began because of this odd, grotesque Obama ideology, which is being passed on by the Obama staffers, all of whom now work for Biden, from Blinken on down, that they have to build up Iran. They have to empower Iran. Iran's economy needs to be strong while they weaken Israel, while they begin the process of controlling Israel, quote unquote, demilitarizing Israel. Because the problem in the Middle East, according to Biden, Blinken, Sullivan, according to Obama and Thomas Friedman, the problem in the Middle East is Israel. That's the problem. And so you can see the complete change from one administration to the next. Meanwhile, Biden today and Blinken doing his shuttle diplomacy behind the scenes, they are undermining, sabotaging Israel and the Netanyahu government. They don't want them to win against Hamas. In fact, they're siding with Hamas. They won't say it openly. Openly, they have what they call the big hug. See, we're with Israel. Well, as I said last night, they're stabbing him in the back. Hamas, war crimes, using civilians as human shields. That's a war crime under the Geneva Conventions. War crime, ordering their civilians not to flee so they would be harmed. War crime, using rape as a weapon of war against the Israeli women. War crime, targeting specifically women and children, even babies. War crime, targeting and slaughtering Israeli civilians. War crime, stealing humanitarian and civilian aid to support their terrorist activity. War crime. And yet it's Israel who's admonished publicly and constantly, over and over again, protect the civilians. Do not displace Palestinians in southern Gaza. In fact, don't even go into southern Gaza. Even more, don't fight in southern Gaza. Now, most of Hamas has moved into southern Gaza away from the north, so they don't want Israel to win. Provide a steady flow of fuel and other provisions without interruption, even though everybody knows Hamas is stealing it and nobody has control over it. And so the Biden administration, Blinken and all the rest, they're actually giving aid and comfort and support, just as they are to Iran, to Hamas. Just as Iran is to Hamas, just as Iran is to Hezbollah. And as far as civilian deaths are concerned, let me reiterate something. The Biden regime, Blinken, Sullivan, this mouthpiece Kirby, they never talk about all the Iranians that have been slaughtered by that regime. They never talk about all the Syrians, hundreds of thousands that have been slaughtered by that regime. They never talk about all the people who have been slaughtered in all of these places in the Middle East, including, yes, Saudi Arabia, yes, Iraq, and in other locations, including Turkey, right there on the outskirts. Erdogan's busy slaughtering people who disagree with him, too. Never talk about Islamophobia in the Middle East, that is, Muslims slaughtering Muslims, and never talk about humanitarian aid and support for all of those people and so forth. Biden's never confronted Xi about the slaughtering of Muslims, Uyghurs. No, not in the least. It's just Israel, which isn't slaughtering anybody. They're fighting a war to protect themselves. Let me tell you something, ladies and gentlemen. If Joe Biden had been president during World War II, we would have lost. We wouldn't have beaten the Germans. The Germans would be saying, okay, we have some hostages here, some POWs. We want to do an exchange for a ceasefire. Would he have agreed to bombing of Dresden when the RAF and the U.S. Air Force did? No, I don't think so. How about the obliteration of Berlin? Would he have agreed to that? No. How about the obliteration of towns and cities across Europe as we fought our way back with our allies to defeat the Axis powers? No, he wouldn't have agreed to that. And of course, he wouldn't have agreed with Harry Truman on how to end the war with Japan, the dropping of 2 atomic bombs, which at the time was not so controversial, but of course is today. All that said, the last time we really won a major war was World War II. And I think we get way too used to waging wars and having no intention of winning them. And in the case of Israel, they have to win every single one of them. And Israel has a monkey on its back, and it's called Joe Biden.
Want to see more Mark Levin? Go to LevinTV.com and subscribe now.